half of the greatest people in Michigan. The early half. It is a joy to see all your smiling faces today. We are starting into an entire month called Family Emphasis Month. Daniel, that is what it's called, correct? I believe that's right. Family Emphasis Month. So we're going to be talking all this week about what it means to be a part of a family. And I'll tell you, I think that we're well equipped for that here at the Waterford Church of Christ, don't you think? Because if any congregation understands family, in our observation, it is most certainly this one. But when you think about what it means to be a family, when we engage in this discussion, there's so many things that flood our hearts, right? When you think of family, what comes to your mind? Well, it may be times of challenge. We've had those in our physical family. We've had times when Lenora came in and had to tell me she forgot to put on the parking brake in her stick shift in a parking lot that was sloped, and it rolled. You know, we've had those days. I remember as a boy the challenges of being disciplined. That's part of being part of a family. Do you remember those times? Anybody remember when it was more money to make a long distance call in the same state than it was to call to a different state? That doesn't make any sense when you're 13 years old and your girlfriend lives across the same state that you met at teen camp, you know? So, I mean, you think you can be on the phone all day, every day, till your mom rips the phone out of the wall and all these. I mean, we have these memories, right? And then I think of the time when our oldest daughter, Rianne, was about 7 and we bought a new go-kart. And Dad was trying to teach her by running next to the go-kart, not thinking about the knobby tires that caught my heel. And she ran over her dad. Thump, thump. You know, these are family stuff. There's heartache. There's joy. There's excitement. There's fear. Every emotion is encapsulated in what it means to be a family, right? And so when we examine, when we dive our minds and our hearts into the subject of what it means to be family, well, there truly can't be a more pure or representative expression of what it is to love God and to be a part of His community than to look at that example, that shadow, if you will, of what the larger spiritual environment is supposed to be. Because we are said to be the children of God. He has named Himself as our Father. And He used those expressions so that we could compare that with our human experience of family. And get an understanding, gain some sort of a grasp on what it means to have relationships that are truly meaningful and are supposed to last forever. Family. You know, our family began 24 years ago. As Lenora came down the aisle, she was so beautiful, and we got in that old car. Because, you know, these days, young people go to Cancun on their honeymoon. Have you noticed that? It's, no offense, young people, but it's ridiculous. You know, you should have to be like us and go to, the Best Western that a member of the church bought us one night for, you know, because that's all you could afford, and driving your 68 Dodge pickup to get there. That's what it used to be like. But since that moment, you know, you look at all of those events that have taken place through the years. It's such an incredible journey. My friend Keith Parker, he's a pretty well-known preacher. On his honeymoon, they went to Atlanta, Georgia, just a few miles away from their home in Alabama, all they could afford. And they went to church on Sunday morning, and the preacher asked him to preach on his honeymoon. And he gave him the topic of heaven. And Brother Keith has always remarked that he's sure glad it wasn't the opposite. And it seems like that's the way families end up, marriages end up, is they start one way or the other, and it's predictive of a life that's either the best it can be or it could be the worst it can be. And that's the reality of family. Family has potential to give you the greatest moments life has to offer, or it has the potential to tear your heart in half. It has the potential to be predictive of a life of heaven or predictive of a life of exactly the opposite. That's why it's important that we place emphasis on family. That's why it's vitally important. It would be beautiful if families never had challenges, if families never had problems, but they do. And no matter who you are or where you are in life, Lenore and I have commented that, maybe 5-10 years ago when everything was going well and parenting was easy and kids were little and easily controllable, we'd look and say, well, we just don't understand. We wouldn't say it out loud, but we'd think to ourselves, it just isn't all that hard. But then life throws you hard, If it isn't hard now, it's going to be hard. Because the reality is that Satan wants to destroy the nucleus of the Christian family. And it is vitally important that we turn to God. Turn to God as our source of strength, as our source of knowledge, and as our source of power as we strive to raise our families. When God came to Abraham and promised him a son, and that's a beautiful picture of family, isn't it? Abraham is the father of all the faithful. So it's appropriate to look back at Abraham and Isaac, his seed, and the whole process through which God was involved in bringing about not just that immediate family, but the entire family of the children of Abraham, which applied to all the Israelites and applies to us. But there in the beginning, when God promised Abraham in his old age a son, you remember what he did? He laughed. Abraham laughed. What a strange thing to laugh at, that God would provide for your family. It's like the fellow I heard about who was in an airport, and he was just laughing and sitting all by himself, nobody around, laughing, and somebody came over and asked him and said, what are you laughing about? He said, well, I'm just telling myself some jokes. I do that to entertain myself sometimes. And that seemed a little odd, but the other fellow said, well, you're all right, but one time I heard you laugh a whole lot louder. He said, yeah, I hadn't heard that one before. Abraham laughs at God when God's promising him a family. And then Sarah laughs at God. And what I want us to make sure we don't do when we're thinking about our family and the future of our families and our plan for our families. You see, Abraham and Sarah, they decided to have their own plan for their family. After they laughed at God, then they went the Ishmael and the Hagar route. Remember that? Because they decided to take it into their own hands, make their own plan for their family, and laugh at God's idea. There are too many people in the world laughing at God when it comes to what it means to be a family. And we need to learn from the example, the negative example of Abraham and Sarah, and look to God, not to laugh, but to learn and to grow and to rely upon Him, His power, His knowledge. Because remember when Sarah laughed, God asked her a question. He says, is anything too hard for the Lord? Raising a family in this world is hard. Because there's no manual. Well, we have the Bible, yes, and a lot of it's principle, though. It's not specific, It's not, well, when your wife says this to you, you don't say this and you do say, it doesn't say, tell it. It gives us principles. There's not an exact manual. We bought some things at IKEA for our new house. There's not a manual for that either. Let me give you a hint. Because it's written in Swedish or something, So you got to kind of just look at the pictures. Well, it's kind of like that with a marriage and with raising children. There's not the scriptures give us pictures. But you're going to mess up. And it's going to be tough. And you're going to look back and wonder, we've done that. Did I do the right thing? Were we good enough in this area? We could have been better in this area. Anybody ever do that? Yeah. But the thing is that God asks her a question that is important as we look at our families today. when she's laughing about God's plan for her family, God says, is anything too hard for the Lord? And I want to tell you that today, regardless of where your family is, regardless of what you feel about the future, there is nothing too hard for the Lord when it comes to our families. Look over in Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 21. And we're going to use this as a kind of a seed text for the rest of our lesson today. And here the Apostle Paul starts, and he does transition into a discussion of families, but he talks first of all about some general principles in regard to relationships. Where he says, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave, so you must also do. But above all these things, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. And let the peace of God rule in your hearts, to which also you were called in one body, and be thankful. And let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, all in wisdom and teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, singing with grace in your heart to the Lord. And whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And wives, submit to your own husbands, as is fitting to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives, and do not be bitter toward them. And children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. And fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. Now, I wanted to read it that way because very few times in my ministry, in my life, have I read through both of those sections as one continuous reading. Because we tend to separate them, don't we? We separate the one and we talk about speaking to one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. And we focus that verse upon worship. And we separate that from this instruction as to how we're supposed to live as husbands and wives and children and fathers. But really, Paul wrote one continuous message, and these things are tied together forever. Because the principles that he's bringing out in verses 12 through verse 17 apply directly to what it means to have a successful family. Because he's focusing on compassion and gentleness and forgiveness and love. And when he talks about speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, if that is important within the body, it is vitally important within the home. He's not just talking about public worship in regard to our singing. Now, there may be an application there, but that's not his whole context. His context here is having a spirit of praise and a spirit of excitement about the things of God, and you need that in your home. You need that in your home with your children, with your wife, with your husband. So you see, he's building up an entire picture of what God wants for the family. And this is what it centers on. Verse 14. But above all things, put on love, which is the bond of perfection. You see, the home is about the gift of love above all things. And this may seem overly simplistic or idealistic. And I tend to avoid those type of discussions. You know, when we talked a few weeks ago about our society having the idea that the solution to everything is more education. That's not true. Or some people think the solution to everything is, you know, if we just have peace among men, that'll solve every problem. That's not true. First of all, that's not possible, but that's not true. But here's a cliche that is often touted in the world and in religious circles, that indeed, even with all of its idealism and all of its cliche, is absolutely true. And that is, all you need is love. Now, don't misunderstand that. All you need isn't necessarily a person's definition of love. You know, because people have all sorts of definitions of love. Some people, when they say, well, all you need is love, that means you just get along no matter what anybody does. You just passively permit. Well, that's not biblical love. So that's not what we mean. But the scriptures tell us here, and in so many places, that indeed, the objective of all human endeavor, and in fact, the root of our very hope, is in the love of God. And as we strive in response to that grace, to love Him and others in return. Love really is what it's all about. And so when we look to our homes, love should be the cardinal objective in all things. If you have to err on one side or another, you need to have a home where there's discipline. You need to have a home where there's self-control. You need to have a home where there is a sense of reward and consequences. All of those things are necessary. But no matter what, if you have to err on one side or another, and one side you're choosing has the word love, always, 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 always err on the side of love. Aren't you grateful God did? Aren't you grateful God did? Notice Paul centers on this word. When you look back in Deuteronomy chapter 24 and verse 5, it's an interesting text because in the law of Moses, God is instructing them how to have the right kind of family. And it tells us, it says, when a man has taken a new wife, he shall not go out to war or be charged with any business. He shall be free at home for 1 year. Why? To bring happiness to his wife, whom he's taken. Another version says, he should be at home for 1 year to cheer up his wife. Think about those words. Cheer her up. Happiness. That tells us God's intent for the home is that the home be a place of joy, that it be a place of happiness, that it be a place where when you have to escape the rest of the world, the best place to go is your own front door. He says, I want the home to be a place of love and acceptance, cheer, and happiness. In Proverbs 15:17, one of those plain-spoken texts where he simply says, better is dinner of herbs where love is than a fatted calf with hatred. And that's one of those where it says, better to sleep on the corner of a leaky roof than it is to live in the same house with a nagging, was that wife or husband? We'll just say a nagging spouse. How's that? You know? But what is that trying to tell us? God didn't intend that the home be a place of pain and strife and suffering. God's desire is that the home is a place of joy, happiness, cheer, and love. That's God's design for our homes. So what does that mean, love? Well, we've talked about this before. There are 4 Greek words for love, and they all mean something different. In English, we just throw the word around, meaninglessly much of the time. But what does that really mean in regard to the family? Well, 5 things, 5 T's, if you will, that love in the home is not. Okay? This is what it's not. Number 1, love is not trivia. You know what trivia means? That means that which is interesting, but not all that important. Love in the home is not trivia. In fact, it is vital. It is not a waste of time. It is a valuable investment. In John chapter 13, when you look over there in verses 34 and 35, one of the critical texts of the New Testament, John 13, 34 and 35, it tells us plainly, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you love one another. By this all men will know that you're my disciples, by the love you have for one another." He says your very identity will be tied to this word love. By the love you have for me, by the love you have for each other. In fact, he'll tell us when Jesus is asked what's the most important thing, he unashamedly, he doesn't say, well, this is kind of how we dodge those questions. Well, there's so many important things. That's how a politician would do it, right? There's so many important things that I don't know how you choose one over the other. No, Jesus answered plainly. He answered without any reservation. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Folks, everything we do in this place, everything we do as believers is rooted in those two things. Do you know why we worship in a doctrinally sound way according to the pattern of Scripture? Not because we're Church of Christ. Not because that's the way we've always done it. Not because we're right and other groups are wrong. Not because we've got more biblical authority and basis. Those are all part of the discussion. But the reason we do it is because we love Him. And we want to please Him. And we want to do it His way. The reason we go out into all the world with Bring, Teach, Keep, and we try to bring people here and teach them about Jesus, is not because, we need more numbers. It's not because that's just what we're commanded to do. It's because we know that God loves them and we love them and we desperately want others to be saved. Everything we do is rooted in this idea. So love is not trivia. Whenever you love, you have invested more than you could in any 401k, through any broker. Love is not trivia. It is a valuable investment. All love. Love for God, love for man, love for strangers, love for enemies, love for animals, love for nature. Love is never a bad investment. Never. Secondly, real love is not talk. It's not trivia and it's not talk. And what I mean by that is sometimes we think of love as simply being words. Those in this world who can twist words, who can use words to confuse. Love is more than just what we say. In 1 John chapter 3, verses 18 and 19, it says, "My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but let us love in deed and in truth. And by this we know that we are of the truth and shall assure our hearts before Him." He said, we don't love just in what we say, not just in word. We love in deed and in truth. You see, love is not just talk, because love must be shown. Love must be exercised. Love is not just what we say, love is what we do. And in your home, you can say the words to your wife or your husband every day, "I love you, I love you, I love you," and act like you don't. And the words will mean nothing. You can tell your children, "I love you," and you can be cruel to them, and those words will mean nothing. Or you can tell your children, "I love you," and never give them any guidance and let them raise themselves in the way they want and doom them to a life of misery in this world. And those words, "I love you," so I believe you can make your own decisions. Those words meant nothing. Love is more than what we say. Love is what we do. It's not trivia. It's not talk. It's not just touch. Now, that's involved. But it's not just touch. You remember Judas, when he came to Jesus the night he was betrayed, what did he do? He kissed him. Just because you shake my hand or you pat me on the back or you give me a hug in the hallway, that's not the extent of love. Love is not just touch. It's much more. Love is not just trade. It's not just trade. It's not an exchange. You understand? Love has no, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. That's not a part of love. Love is not a barter. Love is not a trade. It is not an exchange. It is not a mutually equitable relationship. The greatest folly of marriages today is that a marriage should be 50-50. That's the devil's lie. If you just give 50% and your wife gives 50%, what happens when one of you is having a bad day or a bad week or a bad month or a bad year? And Miss Lenora, people have them. She would say, Mr. Kerry does. And they're only given 25%. You know what your total is? Less than enough. God did not call you. You know what He called us to? For richer or for poorer. Enjoy, I like those times, right? Any adversity. For better or for worse. You see, it's not a trade. When you get married and when you have children, if your children can tear your heart out, but you choose to love them no matter what. When you marry, your spouse can tear your heart out, but you choose to love them. It's a choice to give yourself 100% regardless of how much the other person gives back. It's not a trade. And the final thing we see is it's not a tingling. It's not. In our world, we have this horrendous advice that came right from the pen of Lucifer. And you hear it all the time in the movies. Listen to your heart. Folks, that is always terrible advice for decision making. I don't care if you're buying a car or if you're choosing a wife. It's bad advice. It's the devil's advice. Because your heart doesn't know what it wants. It changes its mind all the time. And so what we do is we don't rely upon a feeling, a tingling. How many marriages don't survive because they didn't start off with the right spirit, with the right mindset? They started off with nothing but a tingling, just a feeling. One fellow says, well, I get a chill when I touch her. And I say, well, maybe she's just cold. Maybe she's just cold. It's just a feeling. Do you understand? Love is not all these things the world tells us it is. In a family, love is not trivia. It's important. Love is not talk. It's more than that. It's doing. It's not touch. Not just that. It's more than just that physical relationship. It's not a trade. Never a trade. It's giving all of yourself, and it's not just a tingling. So what is it? Well, back in our text, in Colossians chapter 3, we look at that very first verse, verse 12. Therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, listen to this word, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another, forgiving one another. If we practice all of those virtues in our families, and we all strive to do it every day, we're going to have great families. We are. So love is not just a trivia, it's not just talk, it's not just touch, it's not just trade, it's not just a tingling. What is it? It's an action. It's putting on these things. That means, you have, everybody got up this morning and you put something on. You know? Either you got up and got out of the shower and you were happy it's Sunday, or you were like Seth. You know, like he is every morning. And we put things on, but to do so, it takes effort. It takes effort. He tells us we put on these things. We put on mercy and kindness, humility. We forgive one another. Love, and this is the conclusion, love is acting better than you feel. It's a simple concept, isn't it? The world doesn't understand it, but that's what it is. And if you don't take anything else from this, remember this quote. It's easier to act your way into a better way of feeling than it is to feel your way into a better way of acting. Do you understand? We used to call that fake it till you make it. And folks, it works. It does. Now, we don't think it works because we don't want to endure it long enough. But I promise you this, as a teenager, I hate to admit this, you know, you're a spiritual preacher and all that. But as a teenager, I never was super thrilled about Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. But you know I was always there. You know why? Because I was part of a family. And it was required. So I remember getting off to college 2,000 miles away and thinking, So the first Wednesday night, I didn't go. Second Wednesday night, I didn't go. Third Wednesday night, I went. You know why? I didn't even realize that habit that Mom and Dad had made me go through year after year, even though I thought I didn't like it, when I didn't have it in my life, it was like, what's going on? Because even though my mindset wasn't right, the habit of just going through the motions of what I needed to be doing had a powerful effect upon my personhood. You understand? It is easier to act your way into a better way of feeling than it is to feel your way into a better way of acting. You can't do it. So when you look in your families, and you see this all the time, don't you? You know any husbands who work 2 or 3 jobs? You think they feel like doing that? They do it because they love their family. You ever know a mama who has little babies who are colicky, cry all night long, and that mama gets out of bed again and again and again, and she just looks like, she just walked off the set of The Walking Dead because it's just over and over and over. Why does she do that? Night after night after night. Does she feel like it? No. But she loves that baby. There's so many examples. What it means to be a family as God designed is to not be deceived as to what love within a family is. All as lies. All those 5 T's. It's to decide. To put on good things. To act as we should. This morning as we start off this new month, I ask you if you need to make any changes in your family. Husbands, if you just want to say, it's not about saying I've been wrong. It's about saying I want to be even better. Right? Wives, it's not about saying I haven't been a good enough wife or a good enough mama. It's about saying I want to be a great wife and I want to be a great mama. Today, if you just want to commit, if you want to commit to being the best you can be for your husband, for your wife, for your children, let's help you. Come right now as we stand and as we sing.